The ocean, vast and untamed, has long been a source of wonder and terror. Stories of the unknown, the unexplained, and the downright chilling. In today's video, we dive into a collection of true short stories, each one connected to the ocean in ways that will make you rethink the depths of its mysteries. From eerie encounters to unexplainable events, these tales will send a shiver down your spine. The catch. I wish I'd never reeled in. I've been living in Bali for a few months now, soaking up the laid-back island life and indulging in my favourite hobby, fishing. Bali's waters are teeming with marine life, and every trip out is a bit of an adventure. Most of the time, I'd just cast off from the shore or join a local fisherman on a boat, sharing stories and beers under the blazing sun. But one trip stands out, and not in a good way. It was late afternoon, just before dusk. I'd found a quiet spot near Ahmed, a black sand beach known for its coral reefs and calm waters. The locals had mentioned that it was a good spot for big catches, though they'd also warned me not to stay out too late. When I pressed them on why, they just shrugged and said something about strange things happening in the water at night. I figured it was just superstitions. Every fishing village seems to have them. With my gear set up and the horizon painted in hues of gold and crimson, I cast my line. The first hour was uneventful, but as the sun dipped lower, the bites started coming. I reeled in a few decent-sized fish, enough to call it a successful trip, but I decided to stay a little longer. The atmosphere was just too serene to leave. That's when it happened. I felt a tug on the line, not the sudden jerk of a fish trying to escape, but a slow, steady pull, like something heavy was dragging my line deeper into the water. I'd never felt anything like it. Excited at the thought of landing a massive catch, I started reeling it in. The resistance was incredible, and my arms burned with the effort, but inch by inch I pulled whatever it was closer to the surface. As I worked the line, the sky darkened and a strange stillness settled over the beach. The usual sounds of the evening, waves lapping, birds calling, insects chirping, seemed to fade away. The only sound was the creak of my reel and my own laboured breathing. I'd been so focused on the line that I hadn't noticed how quickly the light had drained from the sky. Finally, something broke the surface. At first, I thought it was seaweed or debris tangled in the hook, but as I pulled it closer, my stomach turned. It was a doll, a crude, hand-carved wooden figure, about a foot long, with strange symbols etched into its surface. Its head was too large for its body, and its hollow eyes seemed to stare right through me. I've pulled up all sorts of odd things while fishing, discarded nets, shoes, even a wallet once, but this was different. The moment I touched it, a chill ran up my spine, despite the humid tropical air. It felt wrong, like it didn't belong in my hands. My instinct screamed at me to throw it back, but curiosity got the better of me. I set it down on the sand and inspected it closer. The symbols weren't like anything I'd seen before. They were jagged and chaotic, almost like they had been scratched in a hurry. The doll's head had a deep crack running down the middle, and its mouth was carved into a wide, unsettling grin. That's when I noticed the smell. It was faint at first, but it grew stronger the longer I looked at the doll. It was a rancid, earthy odour, like rotting vegetation mixed with something metallic. It made my stomach churn, and I had to cover my nose to keep from gagging. A sudden splash snapped me out of my trance. I looked up, expecting to see another fisherman, or maybe an animal breaking the surface. But the water was empty. The splash had come from just beyond the breakers, where the dark water seemed to stretch endlessly. My gut told me to leave, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. I decided to pack up. The unease that had been creeping up on me was now a full-blown sense of dread. I wrapped the doll in a towel, thinking I'd show it to someone in the village. Maybe they'd know what it was, or how it ended up in the water. As I made my way back to my motorbike, the air seemed heavier, like it was pressing down on me. The shadows cast by the trees along the path looked longer and darker than they should have been. The beach, so tranquil just an hour ago, now felt oppressive, like it was trying to push me away. That night, I barely slept. The doll sat wrapped in the towel on the table, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw its grin, wide and mocking. Around 3 a.m., I heard a faint knocking sound. It wasn't coming from the door or the windows, it was coming from the table. When I turned on the light, the doll was sitting upright, unwrapped, its carved eyes fixed on me. I don't remember much after that. I grabbed the doll, ran outside, and drove straight to the beach. I hurled it into the water as far as I could, watching it disappear beneath the waves. The moment it was gone, the air felt lighter and the oppressive weight I'd been feeling lifted. The hum. This happened a month ago, but it feels like yesterday. My best friend and Caleb and I rented a boat for a weekend fishing trip. We'd been planning it for months, a way to escape work and life for a couple of days. We chose a spot about 30 miles off the coast, far enough out that we wouldn't be bothered by other boats, but still manageable with our limited experience. The weather was perfect, sunny with a slight breeze. It felt like the start of a dream weekend. We set up shop early Saturday morning, lines in the water, beers in hand. The first day was uneventful, just us joking around, catching a few fish, and soaking in the quiet. As the sun set, the horizon turned a fiery orange, and the water mirrored the sky so perfectly it was hard to tell where one ended and the other began. It was beautiful, peaceful. But that night, everything changed. Around midnight, I woke up to the boat rocking harder than usual. The engine was off, and Caleb had gone to bed hours earlier. I figured it was just some waves, but when I stepped out of the cabin, I realized the sea was dead calm. No wind, no current, nothing that could explain the sudden movement. Then I heard it, a low, resonant hum, like a deep bell ringing underwater. It came in pulses, each one vibrating through my chest. I stood there, frozen, scanning the water for any sign of another boat, a whale, anything that could make that noise. But the ocean was empty, stretching out endlessly under the pale light of the moon. "Caleb!" I yelled, my voice cracking. He stumbled out of the cabin, groggy and annoyed, until he saw the look on my face. "What's wrong?" he asked, but before I could answer, the hum came again, louder this time. Caleb's eyes widened as he looked out over the rail. "What the hell is that?" he whispered. The water started to ripple, small at first, then building into a chaotic frenzy. Something massive was moving beneath us. The boat groaned as it shifted, tilting slightly to one side. Caleb grabbed my arm, his grip iron tight. "We need to go, now." I nodded, running to the controls to start the engine. It sputtered, coughed, and died. The few lights we had overhead dimmed and then went out altogether, and I tried the engine again, already knowing the result, but holding out hope. Come on," I muttered, trying again. Nothing. The hum turned into a series of clicks, sharp and rhythmic, echoing all around us. It sounded intelligent, like some kind of language. Caleb grabbed a flashlight and shone it into the water. At first, all we could see was the reflection of the beam on the surface. Then something moved, a shadow so enormous it made our 24-foot boat feel like a toy. "Do you see that?" Caleb whispered, his voice trembling. I nodded, unable to speak. The shadow circled us, slow and deliberate. I caught glimpses of it when it came close to the surface, sleek black skin that shimmered like oil and what looked like tentacles. But they were wrong. They moved with too much precision, too much purpose. Then it surfaced. A massive, featureless head broke the water, followed by a long, sinuous body. It was at least 50 feet long, maybe more, but it wasn't just its size that terrified me. It was its eyes, huge, pale, and glowing faintly in the dark. They locked onto us, and I swear I felt it in my soul. This thing was ancient, something that didn't belong in our world. Caleb screamed and stumbled backward, dropping the flashlight. I scrambled to grab it, my hands shaking so badly I almost dropped it too. When I shone the beam back onto the creature, it was gone. The water was calm again, as if nothing had happened. But we knew better. We could feel it, that weight, that presence, still watching us from below. "We're leaving," Caleb said, his voice firm despite the fear in his eyes. He grabbed the emergency flare gun and fired it into the sky. The bright red light arced high, then fizzled out. We waited, hearts pounding, but no one came. The rest of the night was a blur. We sat back to back in the middle of the boat, clutching knives and praying for dawn. Every sound, a creak of wood, a splash of water, made us jump, but the creature didn't return. When the sun finally rose, we managed to get the engine started and headed back to shore as fast as we could. We didn't speak, didn't look back, just focused on the coastline that felt impossibly far away. We reported the incident to the Coast Guard, but they didn't take us seriously. "Probably a whale," they said, or "You boys had too much to drink." Caleb and I stopped talking about it after that. What was the point? No one would believe us. But I know what I saw, what we saw, and I can't stop thinking about it. That thing is still out there, lurking in the depths, waiting. Sometimes, late at night, I hear that hum again, soft, distant, but unmistakable. I'm hundreds of miles from the ocean, but it's there, in my head, vibrating through my chest like it's calling to me. The next morning, I asked one of the older villagers about the doll. When I described it, his face went pale. He told me it sounded like a jenglot, a figure associated with curses and dark rituals. According to him, these things are meant to be left alone. They're offerings or warnings, not souvenirs. I haven't been fishing since. The ocean, which had always been a source of peace and joy for me, now feels different. I still love Bali, but I've learned to respect its mysteries. Too close to nature. I've been surfing for most of my life. Growing up in Australia, it's practically a rite of passage. I've had my fair share of close calls, strong currents, sudden storms, even a jellyfish sting or two, but nothing like what happened last December. It was early morning, the kind of dawn where the sky is painted in soft oranges and pinks. The beach was nearly empty, just a few other surfers scattered along the break. The waves weren't massive, but they were clean and consistent, perfect for a relaxing session. I paddled out, letting the cool water wake me up, and caught a few small waves to warm up. Everything felt peaceful, until it didn't. About 20 minutes in, I noticed the water had gone strangely still. The waves that had been rolling in like clockwork just stopped. It was like the ocean was holding its breath. I sat on my board, scanning the horizon, trying to figure out what was going on. That's when I saw it. At first, it was just a shadow, a dark shape gliding beneath the surface. My heart rate spiked, but I told myself it was probably just a stingray or a harmless reef shark. They're common enough, and I'd seen them dozens of times before, but this shadow was bigger, much bigger. It circled me once, slow and deliberate, and that's when I caught a glimpse of its dorsal fin breaking the surface. My initial reaction was fear, but I reminded myself that sharks are a natural part of the ocean. Most encounters end without incident. I've always been told that if you see a shark, you should stay calm and avoid splashing. Easy advice to give when you're not the one staring down a predator. My instincts were screaming at me to paddle for shore, but my gut told me that would be a mistake. So I stayed put, barely breathing, hoping it would lose interest and move on. But it didn't. The shadow came closer, and as it did, I realized something important. It wasn't acting aggressively. Its movements were smooth and curious, not frantic or threatening. When it passed beneath me, I got a better look. Its body was sleek and black, and it moved with a grace that was almost mesmerizing. My fear began to ebb, replaced by a sense of awe. It circled me again, and this time, I felt more like an intruder in its home than a target. I started to inch my way toward the shore, moving as slowly and smoothly as I could. Every muscle in my body was tense, but I focused on staying calm. When I was about halfway to shore, the water around me started to ripple. At first, I thought it was the current, but then I realized it was the shark. It darted toward me, then veered away at the last second, as if it was checking me out. My chest felt like it was going to explode, but I kept telling myself that it wasn't attacking, it was just curious. And then it disappeared. 1 second it was there, and the next it was gone. The water went still again, and for a brief, stupid moment I thought maybe I'd imagined the whole thing. But before I could even finish the thought, something brushed against my leg. Not a nibble, not a bite, just a light, almost curious touch. I scrambled back onto my board, my hands shaking so badly I could barely grip it. The shore was so close now, maybe 50 meters, but it felt like a mile. I paddled as fast as I could, no longer caring about staying calm or quiet. Every second felt like an eternity, and I kept waiting for the shark to pull me under, but it didn't. When I finally hit the shallows, I practically threw myself off the board and stumbled onto the sand, collapsing in a heap. I looked back at the water, half expecting to see that dark shape lurking just beyond the breakers. But there was nothing. The ocean was calm, the waves rolling in as if nothing had happened. The other surfers were still out there, oblivious, and I almost called out to warn them. But what could I say? That I'd seen a shark being a shark, that it had simply been doing what animals do, navigating its environment. I've told a few friends about it since then, and most of them said the same thing. You were lucky it didn't bite. But I don't think luck had anything to do with it. I think the shark was just curious. maybe even cautious, like me. After all, I was as much a stranger to it as it was to me. I haven't been back in the water since, not because I'm scared of sharks. If anything, I respect them more now, but because that encounter reminded me of something I'd forgotten. The ocean isn't our world, it belongs to them, and when we enter it, we do so at their mercy, and that's okay. My close encounter with a swarm of jellyfish. Florida beaches have always been a favourite escape for me. The warm sun, turquoise water, and endless stretches of sand. It's paradise. But after what happened last weekend, I'll never look at the ocean quite the same way again. It was a typical sunny afternoon, and I'd gone to the beach to clear my head. The water was calm, inviting, and the perfect way to cool off from the heat. There weren't many people around, just a handful of families and a couple of swimmers scattered along the shore. I waded in slowly, letting the waves lap at my legs before diving beneath the surface. It was refreshing, and for a while I just floated, soaking in the tranquility. After about 20 minutes, I decided to swim out a little further. The water was clear and I could see schools of fish darting below me. Everything felt perfect. Until it didn't. I just started to turn back toward the shore when I felt the first sting. It was sharp, like someone had snapped a rubber band against my ankle. I winced, thinking maybe I'd brushed against some seaweed or a stray piece of fishing line. But then it happened again, on my arm this time, and then my side. Panic set in as I realized what was happening. I glanced down and saw them. Jellyfish. Dozens of them, their translucent bodies barely visible in the water. They were everywhere, pulsing gently, their long, trailing tentacles almost invisible in the sunlight. I'd accidentally swum straight into a swarm. My heart was racing as I tried to move away, but every stroke seemed to bring me closer to more of them. Each sting felt like a hot, electric shock spreading across my skin. My arms, legs, and even my back were on fire. I tried to stay calm, but the pain and fear made it nearly impossible. Just get to shore, I told myself, kicking as hard as I could without splashing too much. I'd read somewhere that thrashing around could attract more attention from sea creatures. Whether it was true or not, I wasn't about to take any chances. The swim back felt like an eternity, my vision blurred from the stinging salt water and the pain radiating across my body. Finally with Bishi, my feet touched the sandy bottom and I stumbled onto the shore, collapsing onto the wet sand. A lifeguard saw me and ran over, his face a mix of concern and urgency. "Jellyfish?" he asked, and I nodded, too breathless to speak. He helped me to a nearby shower station where he poured vinegar over the stings. Apparently it helps neutralize the venom. The smell was awful, but the relief was immediate. The burning sensation dulled, though my skin was still red and welted in places. "You're lucky it wasn't a box jellyfish," he said, handing me a bottle of water with a smile. "These are probably from moon jellies, a little painful, but not deadly." Lucky. I'd never felt less lucky in my life, but I nodded anyway. He gave me a rundown of what to watch for, allergic reactions, difficulty breathing, and told me to take it easy for the rest of the day. I sat on the sand for a while, sipping water and letting the adrenaline wear off. My body ached, but I was okay. It could have been so much worse. Now, a few days later, I've still got faint marks where the tentacles brushed against me, but they're fading. The experience was terrifying, no doubt, but it's also given me a new respect for the ocean. It's beautiful, yes, but it's also wild and unpredictable. We're just visitors in its world, and sometimes it reminds us of that in painful ways. The Witch of the Tides. I grew up in a small coastal town, the kind of place where everyone knows everyone, and the ocean rules our lives. Fishing, surfing, sailing. The sea was our livelihood, our playground, and sometimes our graveyard. But beneath all the charm, there's a shadow over this place, the legend of the Witch of the Tides. Every kid in town grew up hearing the story. She was a widow, they said, abandoned by her fisherman husband who never came back from the sea. Never knowing if the sea took him or if he left her, she waited for him for years. Eventually, consumed by grief and anger, she cursed the waters and drowned herself in the waves. Now, she's said to haunt the coast, luring fishermen to their doom with her mournful song, desperate to find her lover. Most of us laughed it off as a spooky campfire tale. I did too, until last summer. It was late August, and the fishing had been slow all season. I'd taken to going out at odd hours, hoping to find a better spot, or maybe just to clear my head. That night, I decided to try a little cove a few miles down the coast. The locals called it Widow's Hollow, supposedly where the witch's husband last set sail. It was the kind of place that felt wrong even in broad daylight. The night was calm as I launched my small boat, the air heavy with the scent of salt and seaweed. The moon hung low, casting an eerie silver path on the water. It was almost beautiful, but the silence was unsettling. No wind, no waves, no sounds of the usual nocturnal life. Just the steady creak of my oars cutting through the water. I anchored near the center of the cove and cast my line. The minutes stretched into hours, and I didn't catch a thing. Just as I was about to pack it in, I heard it, a faint melodic humming. It was so soft at first that I thought it was my mind playing tricks on me, but as I sat there, straining my ears, it grew louder, clearer. It was a woman's voice singing a tune I didn't recognize, haunting and beautiful all at once. I looked around, trying to locate the source, but the cove was empty. The shoreline was a dark, jagged silhouette against the moonlit sky, and there wasn't another boat in sight. My skin prickled with goosebumps, and every instinct told me to leave. But curiosity is a dangerous thing. The song grew louder, almost inviting, and I found myself drawn toward it. I pulled up the anchor and let the boat drift, following the sound. As I neared the rocky cliffs at the edge of the cove, the air grew colder and the water took on an unnatural stillness. That's when I saw her. She was standing on a rock jutting out from the cliffside, her figure illuminated by the moonlight. Her hair was long and wild, flowing in a way that didn't match the still air. She wore a tattered green dress that clung to her pale skin, and her eyes, they were black, empty voids that seemed to swallow the light around them. Despite the chill, I felt sweat bead on my forehead. I wanted to row away, but my body wouldn't listen. She stopped singing and tilted her head, as if she'd noticed me for the first time. Her lips curled into a smile that was anything but kind. I tried to speak, to say anything, but my throat felt like it was full of sand. Her expression darkened, and she stepped closer to the edge of the rock, her bare feet silent against the stone. Before I could react, the boat lurched violently, nearly throwing me overboard. I grabbed the sides, my heart hammering as I looked down. The water beneath me was no longer calm. It swirled and churned, dark shapes moving just beneath the surface. It felt alive, like it was watching me, waiting. I fumbled with the oars, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold them. The water fought me, the current pulling me back toward her as I struggled to row away. Her laughter followed me, echoing off the cliffs like a cruel mockery. When I finally broke free of the cove, the sea went still again. The moonlight seemed brighter, the air warmer. I looked back once, and she was gone. Just the empty rock and the quiet waves lapping against the shore. I don't know what I saw that night. Maybe it was my imagination fueled by too many stories and too little sleep. But I've never gone back to Widow's Hollow, and I never will. Sometimes, when the wind is just right, I think I can hear her song, faint and distant. And I remember her warning. The ocean is hers, and she doesn't forgive trespassers. Late night swim. Last weekend was my friend Jake's birthday. He'd rented out a beach house for the weekend, and a group of us drove down to celebrate. The day was filled with everything you'd expect: barbecues, drinks, music, and laughter. By the time the sun set, we were all feeling the buzz of good food and too much beer. Around midnight, someone had the bright idea to go for a swim. The ocean was just a short walk from the house, and the idea of cooling off in the water sounded amazing. I wasn't completely sold on the idea at first. Night swimming always felt a little eerie to me, but the group's excitement was contagious. So we grabbed some towels, stumbled our way down the path, and found ourselves standing on the moonlit sand. The beach was stunning at night. The moon was nearly full, casting a silvery glow over the waves, and the water looked calm and inviting. A few of the guys were already sprinting toward the surf, whooping and laughing. The rest of us followed, dropping our towels and wading into the cool water. At first, it was perfect. The water was refreshing, and we were all splashing around like kids. A couple of people started trying to body surf, while others floated on their backs, staring up at the stars. The ocean felt alive but peaceful, and I was starting to think maybe I'd been wrong to hesitate. But then something changed. I can't explain it fully, but the atmosphere shifted. The laughter around me started to feel distant, muffled, like I was hearing it through a thick pane of glass. The water, which had been so welcoming, now felt heavy and cold, even though the night was warm. I'm not sure if the others noticed it too. Everyone seemed to be having fun, but my unease was growing by the second. I decided to float on my back to calm myself down, taking deep breaths and looking up at the sky. That's when I noticed how quiet it had gotten. The waves were still lapping against the shore, but the usual sounds of the beach at night, the distant crash of waves, the occasional seagull, the wind in the dunes, were gone. It was like the ocean had swallowed the sound entirely. I flipped back onto my stomach and looked around. The others were still nearby, splashing and talking, but they felt farther away somehow, even though they hadn't moved. That's when I felt it. Something brushed against my leg. It was quick, just the lightest touch, but it was enough to make my heart jump into my throat. I froze, treading water, my eyes scanning the surface. The moonlight was bright, but the water was dark, and I couldn't see anything below me. I told myself it was probably seaweed or a fish. After all, this was the ocean. Things lived here. But my gut was telling me something else. I called out to the others, asking if anyone had felt anything. Jake laughed and splashed me, saying I was just being paranoid. The others chimed in with jokes about sharks and sea monsters, and I tried to laugh it off, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. A few minutes later, I felt it again. This time, it was more distinct. Something slid past my calf, smooth and deliberate. I kicked instinctively, but whatever it was didn't react. It was gone as quickly as it had come, leaving me gasping for breath and scanning the water frantically. I shouted again, this time more urgently, "Guys, something's in the water!" That got their attention. The joking stopped, and everyone started looking around nervously. Someone suggested we head back to shore, and I didn't need any convincing. We started making our way back, but the uneasy feeling only grew stronger. Every time I moved, I imagined something just below me, watching, waiting. About halfway to shore, the water around me started to ripple. Not waves, but something else, like small disturbances just beneath the surface. I stopped and turned, my heart pounding. The ripples were coming from behind us, and they were getting closer. "Did you see that?" I asked, my voice barely more than a whisper. Jake looked where I was pointing, and his face went pale. "What is that?" We all froze, watching as something broke the surface. At first, it looked like a piece of driftwood, long and dark, but then it moved against the current, dipping back under the water with a grace that was anything but natural. Panic set in. Someone screamed, and we all started swimming as fast as we could. The shore wasn't far, but it felt like miles. The water seemed to drag at me, every stroke taking twice as much effort. I could feel my arms burning, my chest heaving, but I didn't dare stop. When we finally hit the shallows, I stumbled onto the sand, collapsing in a heap. The others weren't far behind, all of us panting and shaking, too scared to speak. We turned to look at the water, half expecting to see something chasing us, but the ocean was calm again, the surface shimmering under the moonlight as if nothing had happened. We didn't talk much on the walk back to the house. Nobody wanted to admit how scared we'd been, but we all knew something was out there. Jake tried to brush it off the next day, saying it was probably just a big fish or a log, but I could see the doubt in his eyes. None of us went back into the water for the rest of the weekend. I still don't know what we saw that night. Maybe it was nothing, just our imaginations running wild in the dark. But sometimes, when I'm lying in bed, I can still feel that brush against my leg, and I wonder. Thank you for joining me on this journey through the mysteries of the deep. The ocean is a place full of wonder, but also one that holds secrets we may never fully understand. If you enjoyed these stories, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you never miss another tale from the unknown. I'd love to hear your thoughts, maybe even share your own ocean encounter in the comments below. Until next time, stay curious, stay safe, and remember, sometimes the sea has its own way of keeping its secrets. See you in the next video. Good night.